Welcome to another edition of Mistake-Free Real Estate. I am your host, Mark Lautour, and today I'm super excited to have another person from down under. As you know, I hail from New Zealand, but I've got a great friend of mine from Australia, Salena Kulkarni. Welcome to the show, Salena.
Thank you so much, Mark. Awesome to be here.
Yeah, thrilled. Guys, Salena is an Amazon best-selling author. She's a CPA, an investment advisor, and the founder of the Freedom Warrior Mastermind in Australia. Her latest program, Freedom Warrior, is a mastermind designed to help people catapult their wealth and shave decades off their time to financial freedom. She challenges traditional wisdom, as do I, and exposes business owners to a new world of alternative cash flow generating investing. And we are thrilled to have her on the show today. So Salena, again, welcome and thanks for your time.
Yeah, let's have some fun.
You bet. So look, let's back up a little bit. You bring a very unique perspective today because most of our investors are American based. And I think they are spoiled with the riches of Midwestern cash flowing properties. For perspective, perhaps just dial back in to tell us a little bit about your investing experience growing up in Australia and really what your experience has been in real estate investing to date.
Yeah, so I think just for context, it's really probably useful for Americans to understand that Australians and New Zealanders in general are obsessed with real estate investing. So we have countless magazines, media talks about it all the time. So what that means is that it makes our real estate market one of the best and worst in the world. It's one of the best because there's no question, there's no barrier to entry. Anyone who has enough grit and determination can get in. And it is a fantastic way for ratcheting up your net worth because we rely very heavily on natural appreciation. And our market over the last 30, 40 years has just gone nuts. It's the worst in the world because every man and their dog thinks they know about real estate. And the challenge with that is the market here is so efficient that it's really, really hard to find great deals. And so you're fighting for deals, which makes it an interesting place for people who've maybe been around the block and are more experienced, but makes it very hard for younger, less experienced investors to get a foothold.
No doubt. So how did you first, what was your first approach or introduction to the American real estate? What tweaked your interest and how have you gone about your research into the markets over here?
So the thing that I kind of discovered back in 2009 was that, I was, my husband and I didn't have exceptional incomes, but we were very, clear that real estate was going to be our path to financial freedom. And I'm a numbers girl, and I would often sit there and go, well, if we keep doing what we're doing, where will we be in X years? And what I realized, and I don't think many people really undertake this analysis, is, we were definitely building net worth on paper. So on paper, we were doing really well. But one of the things that is the hallmark characteristic of real estate in my part of the world is the absolutely dismal cash flow or negative cash flow that you have to carry on most real estate transactions. And even in spite of that, what most Australian and New Zealand investors hope for is that if they hang on long enough, that eventually that negative cash flow will become positive and that, that will eventually turn into, meaningful wealth that they can make those life changes. But back in 2009, I sat there and I did the math, and basically I realized I was at least 25 to maybe 30 years away from getting even close to what I needed in 2009 dollars in order to live. And so I kind of started to say, well, this isn't right. This isn't really what what's the point? If it's going to take me this many years to get where I want to go, what's the point? And that's when I started to go, what else? The banks here are extremely conservative, and getting loans is very challenging, especially when you hold a portfolio of assets. And so I started to look overseas. I looked at the European markets, Spain, Italy, UK, obviously the US. And the thing that sort of jumped out at me immediately was that the US market, hands down, offered completely upside down returns to what we could achieve in Australia from a cash flow perspective. So back in 2009, I just started to, I mean, the first house I bought there was like $7,000 in Detroit. And yeah, that was, that amongst a whole bunch of other things were definitely learning experiences. But as my understanding of that market shifted, as my relationships deepened, I started to really hone in geographically on certain parts of the States and realized that there was definitely a safer path than what most people do.
That's interesting. So when you're looking at a market like the United States, how big a deal is property management, for a foreign investor or even an investor that's in California? What is it that triggers your, due diligence? What are the things that are at the top of your brain when you're interviewing and talking about potentially, buying in a foreign land?
Oh my gosh. I mean, that what you've just said there is literally the most pivotal reason to tread carefully. My experience and why I got lots of cuts and bruises in the first probably 4 or 5 years of my investing journey over there wasn't that the deals weren't great. The real estate was fine in all of the places I invested in. The challenge was if you couldn't find someone who was reputable, honest, diligent, ethical to manage those properties, it was pretty much game over. I mean, it's hard enough managing a property when you're in another state, let alone, on the other side of planet Earth. The time difference, I remember being on calls at, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, getting up at 5 a.m. to just try and catch whoever it was that was supposedly managing my properties. And the property management, and I've said this to so many people, like, the pro formas, the profit and loss that someone can show you on a property versus the reality of managing that property. If you don't have good management, that will literally make or break your experience.
Crush you. Yeah, no, we talk about, in my book, you talk about the two big killers of cash flow being vacancy and maintenance. And both of those are directly correlated to having a dialed in property manager, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, I think I learned that lesson the hard way, unfortunately.
So you exited from your properties in Detroit.
Oh yeah, no, yeah.
Yep.
That's a market that I've long since left behind. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a market, but if you can't find good management, it just doesn't work.
For sure. So no, cash flow, I believe, and I think we're on the same page, Salena, that, the path to freedom, and I'd love to get your perspective, but in my mind, the path to freedom is to have your passive income exceed your monthly expenses. As I see it, that, when you can't generate significant cash flow off of real estate in Australia, New Zealand, or other parts of the world like you can in the US, you're really kind of caught behind the 8 ball because, you're kind of speculating and hoping. So sometimes if you're wanting to really hit a home run, you're really speculating, and sometimes the risk would not outweigh the return. As you might get well out over your skis, trying to invest in those markets. Is that fair?
Yeah, look, I absolutely think the end game is how do you develop an investment portfolio that throws off more income than you need to live? Like that's really the ultimate game. The challenge we have in Australia is the price of our real estate is exorbitant compared to what you guys have over there. So the average price of properties in the, where we live and most of Australia is about $1 million, just shy of $1 million. So what that means is that, from a capital appreciation point of view, you can actually do quite well if you get like anywhere from 5 to 8% per annum capital growth or appreciation. You're doing okay. The challenge is, for people to save the deposits to continue to buy those properties. You can't buy property, cash on cash here. It's just not feasible. But, the journey that I describe to people is there's no question. If you're an average income earner, you have to start your wealth creation journey by building some capital. And you need to use leverage to do that. Like you need some capital to play with. But the thing is, you probably don't need as high a net worth as a lot of people might lead you to believe. if you can kind of work out your minimum effective capital base, and then when you've got some capital to play with, you start to deploy it into opportunities like the ones that you play in, that sort of space, Mark, then, that's when the journey to financial freedom shortens, significantly, and you can start to turn the capital into, income producing assets. And that's really the game. But we just have a slightly different challenge here, because we certainly can't buy a property for 100,000. I mean, you'd be a slumlord here if you were buying properties for that sort of price. So I think, the average American who's an investor doesn't recognize how lucky they are that the breadth and depth of opportunities that you have there. We just don't have that in other parts. You just don't have it in other parts of the world.
So how are you helping them bridge the gap? What steps are you taking to introduce them to these concepts?
Yeah, so the Freedom Warrior Mastermind was really a recognition that there isn't a lot of information available to us here about how to safely access the best of the best deals that exist in the States. And so, really, I'm trying to get the best thinkers, the best education, and layer that with my own fairly contrarian ideas about wealth, so that people can make a really informed decision about how to access those deals. And so the goal is really simple. It's how do you get to a point where you can build predictable, sustainable income in as short a time frame as possible, safely.
Well, and I think you hit on it. I mean, in my view, it starts with mindset first, right? You can't go pursuing cash flow without the commitment to acknowledging that there are certain paths you should take that maybe that your friends and your family and others may be saying, "Oh, why are you doing that? I think you're silly. That's way too risky." When, as you and I know, there's risk in doing nothing with your money, and probably far more risk.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And kind of leading on from what we were saying before, like the challenge here is that literally every man and their dog has an opinion about real estate investing, whether they invest in real estate or not. It's the thing that you talk about when you stand around the barbecue. And so, unfortunately, if you're not someone who's got a community of people around you who are confident in what they do, who know what they do, who have the track record, then you're susceptible to the voices of, opinion, whether or not they're based in reason or fact. So, yeah, I think how you approach, how you think about wealth is very much a kind of, it has to start there before you can start looking for everyone's about like, show me the deals. But I'm like, no, you got to really understand this, because I think the number one rule of investing has to be don't invest in something you don't understand. And I see, unfortunately, people investing from FOMO, or, I don't know if you have that expression, fear of missing out.
Yeah.
And FONGO, fear of not getting out. And so, yeah, you never want to invest from a place of emotion.
So this podcast, as you know, is called Mistake-Free Real Estate, very much tongue-in-cheek. I ask every guest that comes on board a little bit about those mistakes that we all make mistakes. Real estate is obviously no exception to that. What are some of the things that you've learned over the years that you could bestow on someone who's thinking about investing in real estate in the turnkey process? What are things that they should be examining? Maybe lessons that you've learned over the years?
I love that your podcast is called that, actually, Mark, because I think that's probably, you have the luxury of being able to say that because you've been doing this for so long, and no doubt made mistakes along the way. And I know that my mistakes would easily add up to, somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million. That's how much I've made in terms of mistakes. And, I think the journey that I'm on now is really about understanding the mechanics of doing good due diligence, not just on the deals. And I think too often people are just focused on how does the deal stack up. But if you don't find the right team and the right set of advisors to support those deals, you're in a lot of trouble. And the mistakes that I made were probably jumping in to properties and deals which looked good on paper, but which I didn't recognize how important the advisory team to support that deal was. So that's kind of like, they're all kind of different flavors of the same sort of mistakes.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, we have put such an emphasis here at SBD on property management for that exact reason. I mean, and there were mistakes that I've made in the past, even in selling assets to people without, having that dialed in property management. And over the last, really the last 4 years, we've just grown so much in that space where there's so much automation so that you can do. There's so many add-ons. We're actually pre-leasing. I didn't even told you this now. We're actually pre-leasing our assets now. So when someone gives us the 60 days notice, we've already taken a virtual tour of the property. So now we can advertise that property, which is very COVID friendly, right? So we're actually advertising the property ahead of time, showing it virtually, and getting the person to commit to moving in maybe just 4 or 5 days after that person moves out. So in the multifamily space, as you know, it's quite common to get turn times of, just 2 or 3 days because everything's so quick and they can show a model unit and get them in there. But, for single family, that's always a huge challenge. The efficiencies that are coming through property management are saving our investors just so much money.
Yeah, look, I think what I'd add to that is, I think what makes you guys unique is that you as the principal, you're an investor yourself. So you're looking at this from the investor's perspective. And, I think that's not generally been my experience, that's the case. There's a disconnect often between the management, the property management. Often they're just people who've kind of started in that space and
failed realtors, right? Yeah, there's a lot of failed realtors that decided to become property managers.
Yeah, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but I definitely think there's an added dimension to someone who invests alongside you. That for me means a lot. Like, do you walk your talk? Like, do you do what you say you do? Or are you just a, theoretical kind of person who just says they know the game, but maybe doesn't put their own skin in the game? So those things are important.
It is. And the culture that we've built around here also, where we've got, everyone knows. I mean, our whole property management team, if you ask them, they'll say, what kind of property management company are you? They'll say owner centric, meaning we're not going to upcharge for maintenance. We're not going to gig you for fees and little extras. We're paid fairly, but we don't. There's so many property management companies out there that just continually expound and don't care, first of all. So if a property sits for, 60 days, 90 days, 100 days, there's no skin off their nose. Which is unfortunate. But so, yeah, that's a big part of the due diligence. What other challenges are facing Australian investors? We've talked about mindset, talked about due diligence, just not being able to see the assets. Is that a hurdle that's easily overcome? How are you coaching people because especially now you guys are really in a bubble. Travel is a challenge. How has COVID impacted, your ability to coach people into taking action?
Look, I think, my experience is that the people who are, good at providing videos, photos, all of that kind of stuff, probably, most of that's overcome. I mean, even in Australia, people buy properties interstate and never go and see them. So I think we're pretty relaxed about that. But I think the next biggest challenge that comes to my mind is just access to deals. One of the reasons that, our group sought you out was because for us to find those, premium deals in a marketplace, which is, even though you have fewer people interested in real estate, the demand for good deals is staggeringly high. And what we've all seen globally is during COVID is the market has really, catapulted upwards in terms of demand for various reasons, low interest rates, people want to change where they live, all that kind of good stuff. But I think, the number one key for due diligence and for, success has to be, how do you find the people who've already got the machine working that can find the good deals? There is no value as an investor trying to reinvent the wheel, whether we're talking management here or finding the deals themselves. But I think if you can't tick all of those boxes and find people to support that journey, it's really hard. It's really, and the risk of making a mistake is incredibly high. So on all fronts, your starting point when you're looking for real estate is yes, you need good management, but you need people you know, like, and trust who can put the deals together for you as well.
Too right. Well said. Hey, I also would, before we head off, and I know we're pushed for time today, but I want to ask you, give us your perspective. Australia and New Zealand and, Auckland, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, I mean, they're just massive metropolises that continually to get huge amounts of appreciation. Do you see that changing anytime soon? Is there going to be any chance to, is cash flow investing in Australia going to magically happen in the next decade? Or is this just something that, foreign investors should be just looking further afield? What's your prediction or outlook on the Australian, New Zealand property market?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I did a market update last week for my guys here. And look, I'm not a huge fan of trying to crystal ball gaze. And I think you can only make informed decisions based on what's happening right now. There's no question the market's frothy. There's no question. And whether or not the sort of growth that we've had here is sustainable, it's questionable for sure. There's definitely some indicators in the market which are worrying. You look at the bond rates and things like that. I guess the feeling that I have is now more than any other time in history, the decisions that our politicians make about what to do with monetary policies and global economics and things like that, they're going to have a significant role in what happens to property in large, So I think trying to predict that the market will go up or down, I'd say you've got a 50% chance that you'll be right. But I think what makes sense is for investors to be prudent, to tread carefully, and to make investment decisions with enough cushion in it that, they're going to make sense whether the market moves up, down, or sideways. And so I think when we're for me personally, to spend $1 million on an asset that I'm banking on capital growth, for me right now, doesn't make a huge amount of sense. But if I'm talking about putting, 100, 150, 250 into each deal at a time, and that deal is going to cash flow regardless of whether the market moves up, down, or sideways, that makes more sense to me. And I think investors need to start thinking about deals in terms of how much of a cushion do they have, how much of a buffer, how much, if the market dropped, could they carry that, rather than just trying to chase the highest return. Because in a rising market, it's easy to throw a dart at the map of the world and do pretty well. But, global economies and your economy going up, down, or sideways is massively going to affect whether our economy goes up, down, or sideways. So I think to think that you're living in a bubble and that nothing can touch you is maybe not realistic either. So yeah, I don't really know if I answered that. I kind of went round, but
no,
I think
it's
fruitless to try and predict.
I completely agree, and I put you on the spot. No, mate, the intent of the question was to acknowledge that, Australian real estate is not going to go from an average purchase price of $1 million suddenly down to an average purchase price of $600,000, right? It's just not going to happen. And, for those that are potentially sitting on this fence waiting for this massive shift, or rents to suddenly exponentially grow to the point where suddenly something cash flows, far easier to, like you say, instead of, $1 million buying you one house in Australia, having $1 million come and buy you, 10 or 12 houses in America, that will cash flow with professional management. It's not a bad play. It's just, to your point, got to have the right people in place to do it. And I respect you and appreciate you for leading people to, safely invest their money internationally. It's a wonderful thing you're doing through the Freedom Warrior Mastermind.
Yeah, appreciate that, Mark. I definitely think now is a time more than any other to be thinking outside the square. I think if you do what you did yesterday and just hope that you'll get the same result, they're the investors, I think, that will potentially, derail if something major were to happen.
Well said. Well, hey, while I'm surmising here, I will give you a chance and prep for just one last thought. As you know, our investor base here is kind of high income, high net worth individuals that are thinking about investing in the, single family and multifamily space here in the Midwest, very insulated. As you know, even in the downturn in 2008, when things just tanked, Kansas City went down barely 15%, and compared to the 50 to 70% in some of the coasts, California, Florida, New York, and everything. The benefit there also was that because we had rental real estate, our cash flow was very unaffected, because as long as we kept those people in place, which we did a good job of through property management, the properties were still positively cash flowing. So, when you're not reliant on speculative appreciation or upswings in the market, and you just sit back and let cash flow take care of itself with dialed in property management, it seems to be a common theme here, success happens. But hey, one last word, Salena, for those investors that are sitting here. I'm happy to let you take that.
Well, the theme for my my most recent mastermind was about being a nimble investor. So if I were going to end on a word, it would be, be nimble.
Love that. The small, nimble investor that's able to jump over the Pacific Ocean and invest wherever they want.
Well, yeah, just, be able to kind of shift with the changing sands. That's really the
it's a small world, isn't it? And you can really invest, with the right due diligence. The internet has just exploded all kinds of education spaces, and your mastermind is a good example of such. But we live in a very small world with lots of education out there. So would encourage everybody to pick up a copy of Salena's book. Can you tell them how best to get a hold of you, Salena, if they wanted to read your book or get in touch?
Yeah, look, probably the website, which is freedomwarrior.com.au. You can get plenty of great resources, and you can get the book there and other bits and pieces. But if people are interested in just the Australian way and how we're embracing the US way, that's a good place to start.
Well, more so than that, I really enjoyed your book, The Freedom Warrior, and it was a great read. And for those that are thinking outside the box, it's very real estate centric. And so, enjoyed that read, and commend you for being a Amazon bestseller. So go check out The Freedom Warrior by Salena Kulkarni. And Salena, once again, thank you so much for being on the show today. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
You're listening to Mistake-Free Real Estate Radio, the authority in passive real estate investing. No late-night calls, no clogged drains, no tenant nightmares. Take the passive investor's approach to real estate investing and trust a turnkey professional. Learn more at mistakefreerealestate.com. Until next time, remember, you don't get rich from what you earn, you get rich from what you own.